For years, this signal has been dismissed as background noise. This season, it followed the team into a laser grid and didn't come alone. If unexplained noise started showing a pattern, would that convince you, or would you still assume coincidence? And for everyone watching tonight, have you ever caught something on camera or audio you still can't explain? Stick around, because this is a season that's been building toward exactly that question. This recap is based on real events documented across the current season of The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch on History Channel. No dialogue or reactions attributed to Dr. Travis Taylor or any other cast member in this script are invented. Every detail here reflects what was actually broadcast and publicly described in official episode coverage. What follows isn't speculation about what might happen on the show. It's an accurate account of what already has. It's worth pausing for a moment before getting into the details just to explain why this particular thread stands out in a show that has spent years producing one unexplained moment after another. This is a property that has been formally investigated by multiple teams across more than 2 decades, long before the current group of scientists and researchers ever arrived with their current arsenal of sensors, drones, and analyzers. In that time, viewers have seen a long list of individually strange occurrences. Lights with no clear source, equipment that malfunctions in ways technicians can't reproduce under normal conditions, animal behavior that shifts abruptly near certain locations on the property. Most of those moments exist as isolated data points. They happen once, get discussed, get filed away, and rarely reappear in a way that lets the team build a clearer picture of what's actually going on. The recurring signal this season broke that pattern almost immediately, and it did so in a way that's rare even by this show's standards. Instead of a single strange reading captured once and never repeated, this was the same frequency appearing multiple times in different contexts, each occurrence adding a new layer of detail the team didn't have before. That kind of repetition is exactly what separates an interesting anecdote from something a research team can actually treat as a genuine pattern worth building an entire experiment around. To understand why this season's recurring signal has become such a significant thread, it helps to go back to where it first reappeared. Early in the season, during a series of rocket launch experiments designed to study anomalies above the property's most closely watched region, the team's instruments picked up something familiar. A signal sitting right around 1.6 gigahertz, the same frequency range that has haunted this investigation for years. It wasn't the first time researchers on this property had seen a reading like this. Longtime viewers of the show know this particular frequency by reputation alone, a number that shows up again and again across seasons, never fully explained, never definitively dismissed either. What made this instance worth noting wasn't the frequency itself, it was the timing. The signal appeared during active experimentation while the team was mid-launch, working through a string of technical difficulties that had already the day feel unusually difficult. Equipment that should have functioned normally wasn't. A tracking device meant to monitor one specific location on the property had stopped transmitting entirely, and it wasn't a random piece of gear, it was the one covering the most heavily scrutinized region of the ranch. And in the middle of all of that, the familiar signal showed up again, as if to remind the team that whatever they were dealing with hadn't gone anywhere in the years since they'd last recorded it. At the time, it registered as one more strange data point in a season already full of them. Nobody stopped the investigation to chase it down. It got logged, discussed briefly around the command center table, and set aside while the team moved on to the next phase of their work. That's often how these things go in a long-running investigation like this one. Not every anomaly gets pursued the moment it appears. Sometimes a strange reading has to show up more than once before a team decides it's worth dedicating real time and resources to understanding it. That second appearance came a few episodes later, and this time the circumstances were different enough that the team couldn't set it aside so easily. The occasion was a ceremony, not an experiment. The team had invited a Navajo shaman to conduct a traditional prayer ceremony at one of the property's oldest and most consistently strange locations, a homestead that has been tied to orbs, cold anomalies, and unexplained readings for years, long before the current team ever set foot on the land. The purpose of the ceremony wasn't scientific in the traditional sense. It was an attempt to approach the property's history and its more spiritual dimension with the same seriousness the team usually reserves for sensors and spectrum analyzers. Partway through the ceremony, with much of it deliberately left unrecorded, out of respect for the shaman's wishes, Dr. Travis Taylor noticed the same familiar signal reappearing. This time, the team had the tools on hand to actually chase it down instead of simply logging it and moving on. Using a directional antenna, one of the team's technologists was able to confirm that the signal wasn't just present somewhere on the property in a general sense. It was coming specifically from that homestead, the same location where the ceremony was actively taking place. That confirmation changed the tone of the investigation immediately. Several members of the team left the ceremony to head directly to the source, carrying a handheld spectrum analyzer to isolate the reading as precisely as possible. Once there, they were able to pin down the signal's presence inside one of the homestead's old structures, but isolating a signal and explaining it turned out to be two very different problems. They knew where it was coming from. They still had no idea what was producing it. Adding another layer to an already strange sequence of events, a thermal imaging camera operated by another member of the team picked up a hotspot forming directly over the same homestead while all of this was unfolding, a detail that on its own might have been dismissed as equipment error or environmental interference, but landed very differently, coming immediately on the heels of a signal that had just been traced to that exact location during an active ceremony. By this point in the season, the pattern had become impossible to ignore. This wasn't a signal that showed up once, got logged, and disappeared. It was a signal that kept returning to the same general area under different circumstances during both technical experiments and something closer to a spiritual investigation, each time leaving the team with more confirmation of its presence and no closer to an explanation for its source. That brings the story to the third and most elaborate appearance of the signal, the one that turned an already strange season into something the show's longtime audience is still actively discussing. Building directly on what had happened during the ceremony, the team decided to treat that same homestead as the central focus of a much more involved experiment. If the signal kept originating from this one location, the logical next step was to try to make whatever was producing it visible, using tools that could reveal things the human eye simply isn't equipped to catch on its own. The setup was deliberately elaborate. A specialized laser rig was brought into the main structure at the homestead, designed to project a precise grid of beams across the interior of the building. On its own, a laser grid like that doesn't reveal much in open air. The beams are effectively invisible unless there's something in the environment to catch and scatter the light. So the team paired it with a smoke generator, filling the building with a fine haze, specifically so that the laser grid would become visible, turning empty space into something the cameras could actually capture in detail. Alongside the visual setup, the team layered in additional instrumentation. Infrared cameras positioned both inside and outside the structure, LiDAR scanning equipment, spectrum analyzers monitoring the frequency range where the signal had shown up twice already, and even a callback to the ceremony itself. The same distinctive whistle sound used by the shaman during his prayer, reintroduced into the environment as though testing whether it played any role in triggering what the team had already observed twice before. Once everything was in place, the smoke filling the room, the laser grid active, the instrumentation running, the whistle sound reintroduced into the space, the signal appeared again. For the third time this season, and specifically at this same location, the familiar 1.6 gigahertz reading showed up on the team's equipment, this time inside an environment built specifically to make anything moving through it visible. And according to what was actually recorded and broadcast, something did move through it. As the laser grid lit up the smoke-filled room, the footage shows a disruption passing through the beams, something interrupting the projected grid in a way that suggested a physical presence moving through the space in real time. It wasn't a subtle anomaly buried in post-production data analysis. It was something the team could see happening as it occurred, in an environment they had specifically engineered to catch exactly this kind of disturbance. The reaction on site was immediate. One of the team's technologists moved quickly into the building to run a handheld scanning device across the interior, attempting to capture as much detail as possible about whatever had just passed through the laser grid. Communication equipment inside the structure reportedly stopped functioning normally during this window as well, adding yet another layer of technical disruption to a night that had already produced more anomalies than most single episodes in the show's history. Outside, at a separate and unrelated structure elsewhere on the property, other members of the team were simultaneously observing something else entirely unexpected. An unusual light appearing at a location that wasn't even part of the night's planned experiment. Drones were sent to investigate, and thermal imaging showed the area as unusually hot for the conditions, despite there being no obvious source for that heat on a cool night. Whether that second, separate anomaly was connected to the signal and the laser disturbance happening simultaneously elsewhere on the property, or simply another unrelated strange occurrence on a property that seems to generate them regularly, remains an open question the team has not resolved. Taken individually, each of these three moments could be explained away without much difficulty. A signal appearing during a technical experiment might be interference from the equipment itself. A signal traced to a specific building during a ceremony might be coincidence or a byproduct of the many electronic devices the team already had running in that same space. A visual disturbance in a laser grid filled with smoke might be nothing more than the smoke itself settling unevenly, catching the light in a way that looks, at a glance, like something moving through it. But taken together across three separate occasions, in three different contexts, all tracing back to the same frequency and largely the same location, the pattern becomes considerably harder to dismiss with a single tidy explanation. That's precisely why this thread has become one of the season's defining mysteries, rather than a footnote buried in a single episode. It's worth remembering who has been present for all three of these moments, because it shapes how seriously the pattern deserves to be taken. Dr. Travis Taylor, an astrophysicist who has spent years on this investigation, pushing back against conclusions that outpace the available evidence, has been directly involved in identifying the signal each time it appeared this season. His role on the team has never been to chase excitement for its own sake. It has consistently been to look for the mundane explanation first, to question readings before accepting them, and to demand more than a single data point before drawing any real conclusion. A pattern repeating 3 times, under 3 different sets of conditions, in front of a team that includes someone with that kind of consistently skeptical track record, carries a different kind of weight than a single strange reading caught once and never repeated. None of this means the mystery has been solved. If anything, the opposite is true. The team ended this stretch of the season with more confirmed data than they've had in years about where this signal originates and what accompanies it, but still no clear answer for what is actually producing it or why it keeps returning to the same general area of the property. There are a handful of possibilities worth weighing the same way any serious investigation has to weigh them before reaching for the most dramatic explanation. There's the technical explanation, the one that has followed this particular frequency for years. Signals in this general range aren't inherently mysterious on their own. Comparable frequencies are used by a range of ordinary systems, from satellite communications to certain military and aviation technology. It's possible that some or all of these 3 appearances trace back to a source with a perfectly mundane technical explanation, something the team simply hasn't been able to fully rule out yet, given the property's remote location, history of interference with sensitive equipment. There's the environmental explanation, one that's been floated in connection with this property for years by researchers examining its unusual geology. If the ground itself has properties that interact with electronic equipment in ways not yet fully understood, that could account for both the recurring signal and the pattern of equipment malfunction that seem to cluster around the same locations without requiring anything beyond an unusual, if still poorly understood, natural phenomenon. And then there's the explanation the show and its audience keep circling back to, the one tied directly to the property's much older reputation. Long before any modern investigation began, this land carried a name and a legend describing a shape-shifting presence tied to Native American tradition, a presence associated with exactly the kind of unpredictable, hard-to-pin-down activity the team has now documented occurring in the same location 3 separate times in a single season. Nobody on the team has claimed to have proven that connection, but after 3 appearances of the same signal at the same place, culminating in something visibly moving through a room built specifically to reveal exactly that kind of presence, it's not hard to understand why that older legend keeps resurfacing in the conversation. What makes this thread genuinely different from earlier seasons of the show isn't the strangeness of any single moment on its own. Skinwalker Ranch has produced isolated anomalies for years, plenty of which never resurfaced or connected to anything beyond the episode they appeared in. What makes this different is the repetition and the fact that each appearance built directly on the last one, with the team using what they learned from the first 2 encounters to design an experiment specifically capable of capturing a third. That's a meaningfully different kind of evidence than a single strange night caught on camera. It suggests something consistent enough to be anticipated, tracked, and ultimately, at least partially, observed under conditions designed for exactly that purpose. Whether that consistency points toward a technical explanation, an environmental one, or something closer to the property's oldest legends, the team still doesn't know for certain. But for the first time in a long while, they have something more than a single unexplained moment to work with. There's also something worth noting about how the team's own approach shifted across these three appearances, because it mirrors the way any good investigation should evolve over time. The first time the signal showed up, during the rocket experiments, the response was minimal. A brief acknowledgement, a note in the data log, and a return to the planned schedule for the day. There was no reason yet to treat it as anything more than one more strange reading in a season full of them. By the second appearance during the ceremony, the response had changed considerably. The team actively pursued the signal in real time, using directional equipment to trace its origin rather than simply recording that it had occurred. And by the third appearance, the team had gone even further, designing an entire experiment in advance, specifically built around the possibility that the signal would return to the same location a third time. That progression from passive observation to active pursuit to deliberate experimentation is itself a kind of evidence separate from whatever the signal turns out to actually be. It shows a team that started taking a pattern seriously enough to build their entire investigative strategy around it, rather than continuing to treat each appearance as an isolated curiosity. Whatever explanation eventually accounts for this signal, it will have to account for that shift in approach as well. For a team of trained skeptics who watched a single anomaly repeat itself enough times that ignoring it stopped being a reasonable option. So here's where the season leaves it, at least for now. 3 times, the same signal returned to roughly the same place. The third time, the team was ready with lasers, smoke, and instrumentations built specifically to catch whatever might be causing it, and something moved through that setup in front of the cameras. If a pattern like that showed up on your own property 3 separate times, would you keep investigating the way this team has? Or would there come a point where you'd rather not know what keeps coming back?